so much. Thank you, Tambra, for this interview. I look forward to talking with you about your career in nutrition and dietetics. This interview is really about your career, not specifically what you're doing in your day-to-day tasks, but really to give people a sense of how you got where you are in your career.
No problem.
I have a program that's related to nutrition careers. It's the Nutrition Career Pathfinder, and it helps people who are new in their career to figure out what they want to do as with an interest in nutrition and dietetics. And so reading about and hearing about people like yourself, I think it's really helpful to understand what it takes to build a career. And you have such an interesting career. You are a serial entrepreneur, I think, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Would you tell us a little bit about your childhood and maybe what led you to an interest in nutrition and dietetics?
Most definitely. So first, thank you for the opportunity to speak and just share what this journey has been. I never really envisioned early as a child nutrition. I didn't even know the field even existed when I was a child growing up in Oklahoma. I just knew that I, at a young age, had a passion for art. If I were to be honest, that was my first love. But then it was really plain like I had a restaurant in my home that I first connected to food. And the connection to food being actually used to actually heal people didn't really come about and fast forward until college, and being in my chemistry class and speaking with a classmate who at the time was a nutrition major. And she told me about the department. I was in biology at the time, pre-med, and I had my angst with the fact that we did not have a biology department, but we had all the subsets of biology. And so I didn't really feel like I had a home. And so by her telling me about the department, I ventured over and learned that they had a pre-med option. It was a real science. As the dean, Knab at the time, she would share that we are not HES for Home Economics School. We are the Department of Human Environmental Sciences, and you will not find any brooms anywhere around here. And I think that was a point she made, because in the other STEM areas, when I ventured to speak to the math department chair, he would call it a home ec school. And I was that kid who did not take home ec because I thought that was just common sense that your mother taught you. Only to later learn that not everybody has parents that may teach you these things. And so I kind of thought my sister was in blow-off classes taking home ec. But now fast forward, being a mom, seeing the importance of what home economics and the history of it really was the root of, to me, nutrition and how I see nutrition, having been an extension agent around the importance of family and child nutrition. And so I first was introduced into nutrition via science, the biochemistry of it, and researching in the nutrition labs with rat models and studying bone mineral research. It took time and it took mentorship like Dr. Shriki Kuminika, Dr. Karen Peterson, and others for me to see this community connection to nutrition that I now fast forward find myself connected to in my PhD program, looking at community level communication that was influenced from studying even public health after nutrition at Tufts, really community health, if I were to be honest. Yeah. Of that community is everything in order to change culture, change how we see food and the relationship it has in our lives. And so it's been an evolutionary process, I would say, going through this journey.
So to back up a little bit, what was your childhood like in terms of food? You mentioned this restaurant where you used to go, and and what else impacted you?
Yeah, I literally made crocheted Mama's Kitchen, that was my restaurant. I made menus. My sister was my loyal customer, and today's special was anything left over from the night before, with staple items such as sandwiches that I would make. And so for me, seeing that my family, like many in the US, have had impact of different disease states from heart disease to diabetes, and seeing the connection that food played a role in any of this, I did not make early on. It was having that sinking feeling in Nutrition 101 when we had to analyze our Thanksgiving meal. At the time, I thought I was ahead of my time with these Palm Pilots where we can do nutrition analysis. I had learned from going to a nutrition conference. And I was like, why get in front of a desktop at school when I could just do my own like mobile analysis right in my home? So when I had put in things that we would eat, like chitlins was just like it's like a celebratory food you have once a year at holiday time. Mm-hmm. And I saw the fat content from the analysis, and that those numbers changed my life. And I never put a chitlin in my mouth after that. Let alone the fact that, you know, the odor alone when your mother cooked and cleaned them was enough to deter you from eating it, but it was really the numbers. And seeing how in nutrition, we're kind of one step removed from being a bean counter if you go a certain direction in the path. That has not been my path, but I do find that the numbers do play a role, but it's also the storytelling of those numbers, painting the context and the humanization of that data that I now see where I find my calling and I enjoy, and that's why I'm now in communication.
So were you able to influence your parents at all or your family? So it sounds like you had a very Southern, sort of traditional Southern food upbringing.
You know, I wondered about that because Oklahoma, now that I'm in Washington, D.C., if I tell people I'm from there, they don't think that it's the South.
Right.
And so I've had to challenge myself, then what are we? Are we our own geographical culture? You know, I just call it the heartland at this point, because when I say the Midwest, people from Minnesota and others will say, no, we're the Midwest. So our cultural upbringing definitely was Southern influence, but I realized there's a special subcategory of that region when it comes to cuisine that is unique within its own right. I think because of my roots coming, you know, having my family being in Texas before we migrated to Oklahoma played a role, along with that whole Southern belt of Mississippi and Georgia before. Many generations removed, you know, a staple item would be beans and cornbread that I would enjoy as a comfort food. Everything dyed, fried, laid to the side was definitely a thing, even down to the vegetables like a fried corn, fried everything, fried okra, only to later realize that that is how you will end up if you keep eating those items. Yeah. So I definitely have had kind of like a transfiguration of Jesus. It is the Bible Belt. And so food and faith definitely tie well into one another, sometimes to our own deficit, believing that if we simply just pray over the chitlins, we will just be good. And it's really pray to stay away from the plate is really the idea in some items, or at least in moderation, if nothing else.
Okay, so take us further then. You had this relationship with food as a young person, but not until you really got into college and you saw that biology wasn't working. So you went through the nutrition program. Where did you go to school, and how did you manage your internship, and how did you, you know, there's a big process that goes from graduating from college to actually doing the internship. So
sure,
you could talk a little bit about that.
Most definitely. So for me, I was, again, dead set believing that I would be a doctor. And so I came into nutrition really from a research pre-med situation. Every semester was at Oklahoma State University, which is where I studied nutrition. I had a very enjoyable time. I was the only African-American in my program at the time, and I was not a dietetics major by the least. And I say this because the distinction with nutrition research, it was more international. It was more, we were in the lab. I had a mindset that it's the researchers that matter that create the foundation for clinicians to even do their work with the whole evidence-based approach. So it took time for me to even value dietetics, if I were to be honest. And it took different exposures, being every summer from Harvard to Baylor Med to abroad in Dominican Republic to UPenn Med, working with other nutrition researchers who had dietetics training to see this connection between research community and clinic. And I think the other part is I simply was never asked, maybe because I was so adamant of being a doctor, that no one said, did you ever think about considering dietetics? I call it the water bottle club. So I did not culturally see myself in that lane because I was so adamant about research and medicine.
And what was the phrase you used, the water butter club?
The water bottle club. Basically, all the dietetic majors, at least at my school, had water bottles, when they go into the classroom. So I never told anyone this. Yeah. But I was like, I called them the water bottle club. Like,
that's so funny. Well, I mean, it's true. The reputation is that they're all white, blonde, beautiful, perfect, thin bodies, right? And carry water bottles. Right.
And most definitely, or diet sodas, which I thought that was an oxymoron. Like, how do you do that? Right. So because of these differences and me being the only one at the time, I just did not see a culture fit in that space of it. So it took, me going to graduate school at Tufts, studying community health. Initially, even at the time of being at Tufts, I was interning at Harvard Public Health in the nutrition department. And one of the research managers had studied at Tufts in Friedman. And I went over to talk to one of the heads over there at the time, and it was kind of dissuaded to think about dietetics. And so I didn't go that path. I ended up going through the medical school, and they accepted me and provided funding, which always helps to make decisions. Sure. And it was a #1 at the time in community health. And so I just hung my hat, focusing on and saying, well, I already have a strong nutrition background. This is an opportunity for me to understand these social determinants of health and how nutrition is just one spoke of the wheel. And ultimately, it will make me better well-rounded. And so after that, I then landed an opportunity to work at U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I always had this dream of, if not being the Surgeon General, working for the Surgeon General. And so it was a dream come true to be able to do that at the secretarial level. And again, I found myself learning every other aspect of health, how policy influences, how politics influence, dietary guidelines at the time when I was there in about 2005. And for me, I felt my life was much richer in order to circle back into nutrition because of these experiences. It took my studying, I went back to school to study dietetics, actually at University of the District of Columbia, and went through internship. That was a hard-fought battle, but now that what I've learned through this process, because we have to be mindful that I'm both going through a transformative process professionally and personally. I birthed 2 children in this time period. My father had died. All these things influenced how I thought about how I want to redefine my career path on my own terms versus by the book. And so because of that, I said that if I'm going to go this pathway in this field, it needs to be one of authenticity, because for so long as any child, you grew up with these societal norms that you may even self-impose of what you should be in this world in order to fit. And all of that was challenged once my father passed, because I really did see his passion for food and opening up a restaurant and me helping a part of that process back home. And that was obliterated. And I had to rethink what my path would be and how do I honor him. And so I thought, how does food and family and our heritage come together, and why, of course, in food and culture, I thought back about how that, even though it was an elective, I think it truly should be mandated, because it helped me to think about food in a way that I hadn't thought about before, that I might even had, I won't say disqualified, but maybe downplayed the importance of it. But I now see the importance of what culture means when it comes to food and how it shapes or reflects our identity, and why when it comes to changing culture, changing diets, and how people counsel one another around, nutrition and medical nutrition therapy, these factors heavily play into this process. And it's so important, or it's important that I've come to understand, and why it's become just as important as a vitamin D. But now the vitamin D is D for decolonization of our plates, and why that echoes with so many, and understanding the historical context as I watch The Crown and the British Empire and the impact that it has played in culture and colonization and influencing of cuisines. It all really does circle back. And now I have language in my program to speak to these hegemonic powers, what we would call, that has played out in the nutrition space that I never was educated about, but only because I ventured outside of the field that I began to understand that sometimes one, Tufts Alum, who grandparents started Brigham Women's Hospital, said sometimes the people that will make a difference in health will come out of health. That really resonated with me. And that's what I've now found myself always being open to learn of other sectors and industries, and how can I take these learnings and apply it back to home, and food in the kitchen to me represents that.
Yeah. So what was this time period then between leaving college? You had lots of different jobs in the middle there. You talked about having your two children, your father dying, and all of that having such a huge influence on then deciding to become a dietitian, because you felt like you needed that extra credential. And then from there, you move forward. And I know your focus has shifted. Was the RD something that you felt you needed that credential for something? Or
honestly, I would say that I do not call myself a dietitian.
No, I'm sure you don't.
And I, for me, when I dealt with my father dying, it was a moment of kind of like turning into a butterfly, going through a metamorphosis process, and having gone through a series of different government jobs, and how I fixated this identity onto me, I became very clear that I will not be branded.
Yeah.
I will create my own identity. And there was power in that, because if anyone, especially in these current times, have been let go of a job, or you left a job or a marriage or any kind of relationship that you really felt wedded to, it challenges you in who am I? And I took yoga for a few years that helped me to ask that question and start that journey of defining who am I? And it was through that process that I said, I am Wanda. And that really was about identifying a space that was not feeling very welcoming to me, but a space that I felt I could belong, and a space that others could identify with, that spoke to the very thing that was a missed opportunity more than anything else. And social entrepreneurship, being exposed to that early on in Boston, going to the conferences at Harvard and Net Impact, all influenced me to understand that when you see what you may see a problem or a challenge, that you could either choose to be on the sidelines or you can choose to create the space that you wish to see. And being around other change makers helped me to understand that it does not have to be a depressed kind of state of affairs that we engage in, that we can choose to uplift and create a new chapter in this story. And that's the one that I call Wanda, of creating that new chapter of how I wish to reimagine the foods and the women and the narratives that shape how we think about the legacy we wish to live and lead in our own communities, in our daily lives.
So it sounds like a lot of deep searching and experimenting.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things I learned from understanding the Egyptian civilization was the schools were based upon creating a sense of self-mastery. That's the only thing to achieve in life. Master thyself, and to thy own self be true. And for me, that became reflective in food simply being a metaphor of that evolutionary process of how do I wish to show through food, my set of values, my set of beliefs, and in essence of who am I? If this was an archaeological dig and you were to find remnants of my past, what would it uncover and show?
Yeah.
And so that's where that thinking has come into, is that every day, how do I improve and be a better version of myself?
But you're also very purpose driven. So where did that come from?
That I could say, I do honor and value my Oklahoma roots. I would say the 4 F's of Oklahoma is faith, food, football, and family. And I didn't realize in many ways I had more in common with immigrants outside of the US having studied abroad than those from the North. There really is 2 different cultures in this America. And having lived in the North, I became very clear of understanding like we are different, but it's those differences that can make us better. If we're willing to have open hearts and open minds and see the commonality and humanity that we all share. And that's, to me, what became powerful of food being a reflection of that, the idea of communing together through community, through communication, through a communal plate that some cultures share. We have, in essence, become very individualized in our belief systems that our plates now reflect that. And it doesn't bring us together because we don't share plates together. And I began rethinking that when my father passed, about who am I, and tracing my heritage back to Nigeria and traveling there and seeing firsthand, that was a moment of grounding me in my, I would say, true identity of Fulani heritage, and knowing that runs through my veins and my genes. And it was just me to unlock that potential that my culture is my superpower. And how do I have that reflect in my career path, in my, what governs me, what guides me, and my family. And I think that is something that many African Americans have had an unfortunate dynamic of not being grounded in an identity and roots that have been disrupted and disturbed. And sometimes we have owned these really colonized concepts of cuisine and making our own because that's how you survive, that's how you show resiliency, but it may not be the best way to thrive. And so I've investigated this idea of how does health look like through food, and how do we challenge this concept, and how we teach that to communities, and how we teach that to future nutritionists who may not have this grounding of self-mastery, but one must do in order to be. And that means to be excellent in your chosen path to be excellent in how we choose to be written in future history, if one can think that way. But I find that that is the most important way, is if you were to die tomorrow, what would be on your epitaph? What will be on your tombstone? How will you be remembered? And how does the work you do every day reflect that and make an impact in that? Because otherwise, why would you not want to live a life of significance and service? And that's what I know for sure.
Mm-hmm. Did you have strong role models that influenced that belief?
I definitely had role models like my school principal. I grew up in a very predominantly white community, a military community, and we had a African-American woman as our principal who hailed from New York, and she had her doctorate, and she was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And all these dynamics played a role because I was a first generation college student. Though my family, I believe, is quite smart, they didn't necessarily have the paperwork to prove that, partly because many could not afford an education, even though they might have got accepted into it. And so it was really me and my generation being the first to finally get our college financed through academic scholarships and merit, and be able to show that there is another way. And I think for me, the other part, you know, my mom would sometimes say, you know, Tambra, I won't always show you what to do, but I can show you what not to do. And I think, you know, just as we talk about nutrition, the things that we should eat and the things that we should not eat, I took that to heart as another way to still learn. And she would say, sometimes you don't always have to do things to learn things. And I took that to heart. And I look to learn from other people's experiences, reading bios. Wendy Williams loved saying, you know, she has friends in her head. Well, the friends in my head were surgeon generals. Or the friends in my head were those who are researchers and scholars. I would literally go through their bios and highlight and underline and see a roadmap, almost like a hidden treasure map of how to guide me when I had no immediate guidance around me. And I would read their stories. As you see, I have books behind me because partly I didn't grow up with too many books. I grew up with most families, a set of encyclopedias and maybe an occasional book, but it was words from Maya Angelou. I know why a caged bird sings. It spoke to me. And it was influences of strong women that I leaned on to guide me, and being always in a situation to be able to receive empowering words. If it was a youth leadership conference like Rotary I was a part of, or Lions or Kiwanis, I was a part of those opportunities, and that's how I took life. I took the opportunity that was put in front of me to be able to continue to forge through on this path called life.
It sounds like you made a tremendous amount of opportunities too, not only taking advantage of them when they were presented. What is your focus now with Wanda? Is that your primary job now?
Well,
what is your focus and future with that?
Yeah, my trilogy is Wanda for sure, but also my PhD program at American, and also my family. So I try to balance those three things to the best of my ability, God willing. But for Wanda, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. And so our focus, now we're launching actually the Wanda Fellowship. One of the things that we know beyond a lack of diversity in dietetics is the fact that we have those who've gone through an internship program. Finances tend to be a real issue because you have to pay for the internship. And so we partnered with another company, Good Food Markets, who is launching a new store that will be what we call My Community in Ward 8, a food apartheid. And so we want to be able to have both mentorship, scholarship, and externship together. Nice. And so that will be a 12-week program where that fellow will engage with our leadership development program that we're piloting, as well as be able to provide cooking classes and wellness education within the store and virtually. and also receive funding that they can use at their disposal for their personal educational needs. And so it's valued at $5,000. We hope that we can grow more in this area of providing funding opportunities, in addition to continue to develop educational products such as the Wanda books and coloring books and cookbooks that speak to co-creating and curating remixed recipes from the community of women who are everyday food heroes that may not have titles, but they make an impact. And the reality is the state of affairs with the 2.7% of African Americans in dietetics and 10% people of color, even if we made tremendous strides in policy change, which is desperately needed, from a need to have a loan repayment program for nutrition dietetics. It does not currently exist under HRSA, the National Health Service Corps program, or the fact that we only have 50% that can even get a seat in an internship is deplorable. That we have to look at what more can be done. And so we're trying to do our small little part in this, but policy is needed. Campaign is needed, and I commend all those who are out in the field looking and trying and doing the work of creating more justice in an unjust system. Because the reality is everyone should have access to nutrition, counseling, and education, and it should be reflective of their cultural background and not one that is very monolithic in nature, which is unfortunately how it's been presented. And so there is a reform that's needed in the field. And that is why I am doing the work of Wanda, but at the same time in my doctoral program, I'm at the School of Communication where our concentration is media, technology, and democracy. The reason why I've gone this path is because I understand that digital media isn't going anywhere. It is only in its early maturation phase that will only continue to grow. And it represents an opportunity that where counter narratives are gaining voice and being able to call to power to the people of how do we wish to change and see the world that we deserve. And so for me, my focus has been food and health communication, but in particularly how organizations are organizing and mobilizing communities around health, particularly women's health is an interest of mine, and Black women's health in particular. Yeah. So that is one way in which I think, but the other parts of Wanda is our focus is on education, advocacy, and innovation. Developing strategic partnerships is key. Being able to have platforms like yours to speak and connect is key, but also being able to connect to the people is a key. And so we will still continue to grow our Wanda Academy in order to provide the democratization of not only nutrition literacy, but also the importance of self-care as a form of resistance, and the need to develop leaders on the ground that may never find themselves in a dietetic classroom, but desperately need some training in nutrition to help make their families a bit more healthy. If we're able to have, platforms like a WebMD to help educate more people on basic health, there should be a desire and a need to be filled of those who understand that home economics is something that should have a comeback. Yes. And so if we're not doing that in our classrooms, we now have the ability to use digital communities to do the same. And so that's why I see the importance of growing and expanding our academy, not only in the US, but abroad, and build relationships within the African diaspora in particular, because there is a global community of women who create peace through food, and we want to be a part of that bridge building process.
Yeah. And so you do the work of 10 people, and you have 2 young children.
There's Team Wanda.
How do you manage to balance that? So, somebody listening to you speak, I mean, it's amazing what you accomplish, right? And the depth of your thought and the clarity of your mission, right? What's your advice to younger people figuring out how they're going to make an impact in their lives? How do you balance your life the way you have and be so productive?
I first admit I'm a recovering overachiever, and I don't know if I'll ever really recover. I say that
well, that's not a bad thing to be an overachiever.
I received an overachiever award in high school, literally.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I just I put that in context in what I'm about to say,
Okay.
because I recognize that, you know, work ethic matters. But at the same time, we have to be patient with ourselves. And I'm reminded that quite often by friends and family. And part of that, is I have a Harriet Tubman mindset, and I've always had a Moses mindset. And part of that is just spending time with yourself and asking the deeper questions of who am I? Mm-hmm. What do I want to achieve in this world? What do I want to be an achievement of myself that I can be proud of? Those are the things that motivate me. I think about only now as a mother, some may think about what financial legacy you will leave. I think about, I rather leave the wisdom, because they can always use the wisdom and convert that into currency. And so it is choosing to think through a different lens. I choose not to have a TV in my home as one way to think about it. One, leapfrogging of technology has played a role in that, but it's also recognizing that more books than screens are critically important for me, of recognizing that the knowledge of those who've come before us can give us a clear path, or at least give us a bit insight of how to move forward. It's no different than in a doctorate program. We talk about what is the gap in literature that we will add new knowledge and fill. Well, that's like life. We have a lot of gaps, but the question is, which gap will you fill today? And how do you do it within your respective field? But my mindset is to cut through silos, to cut through sectors, to cut through geographies and anything that restrict us with boundaries and walls and borders. And I truly believe that this idea of democratization of power to people, and the more we play into that space, is going to be important. And that starts with democratizing our own minds, of giving ourselves our own power, or at least recognizing the power potential within us. And sometimes that can be quite challenging for people, because maybe they have been traumatized as a child. They've not been spoken to in a highly effective way. And so it takes time to gain the confidence, it takes time to gain the self-esteem, and the self-worth that you do matter. You have a place in this world no matter what. A teacher, a professor, a parent, or a stranger may say, but if with the right mentorship, and you being your best mentor, I find most important, that's where the power lies. And it's really just unlocking that power that was already within you. And that's become the Wanda motto, that all I need is already within my culture, within my food ways, within my womanhood. And it should be no mistaken that women have tremendous power in this food space. It's just, how do we choose to reshape that narrative that one is of liberation and not weaponized in many ways in which food has become. So I lean to history to give me insight of how to guide me on this process. And so I am a big history buff because of that.
You're an incredible role model for other women, for all women, on how to really dive deep the way you have, and be very, very intentional about your career and your family. Do you feel like you are able to reach people now with your the Wanda Academy? Is that the part that is reaching youth in Ward 8? Is it through the Wanda Academy? I mean, are you able to put yourself in front of young people so they can hear you thinking and talking about these concepts in order to be a role model to them?
Pre-COVID, we did conduct youth programming with partners in the community, like the Ethiopian Community Center and others. But things have changed with COVID. You know, we were literally in a partnership with our local WIC and a local grocery store in our community that got appended. And so it was an opportunity when we worked with Sibley. We were in their Ward Infinity program that we incubated the idea of how can we use technology pre-COVID. And it was only through an opportunity with DC Healthcare Finance. They had an RFA that we applied and we accepted, that we were able to launch the Wanda Academy, primarily focused on their directive, which was to support Ward 7 and 8 residents on Medicaid. And so that's how it initially began, with a focus of women who were the mamas, the aunties, and the nanas of Little Wanda.
Yeah.
And it was helpful to start that path because it was one that I did have trepidation of. You know, I would hear phrases, you know, like start with the children. And so I stuck with it. And that's why I had created Little Wanda as a character and had the book as a calling card to share that our children can be more than what society says they can be, these superheroes in our communities using their food. But I realized that having now become co-chair of Women in Toys Licensing and Entertainment, where I'm looking to bridge the world of food and entertainment together as a powerful vehicle to democratize and share this message, you know, the reality is every woman, every person has a Little Wanda within them. And the moment I began to understand that by understanding toy psychology, it had me to realize they are Little Wandas too.
Mm-hmm.
Think about adults who are still stunted emotionally or psychologically at the age of 12 because of some childhood trauma. That food was then self-medicating them to cope through that process of trauma. So once I became to realize that, then every woman, every girl is Wanda, and that is where we will begin. And we can then look forward to bringing their children on board because they now have seen the wisdom of Wanda and see the capacity in which it can help uplift their own children too.
So that's a great vehicle for spreading the word then, and helping people relate to the importance of food and culture and empowerment.
Most definitely.
Yeah, that's a great initiative. You know, you're such an entrepreneur. So where did you get these? And I want to be mindful of your time. But where, I mean, you've talked a lot about the skills that are needed and that you have developed over the years that have brought you to this place. What's your advice, sort of in closing, what's your advice to people who love food and nutrition, and maybe they understand this connection to democracy and power and food as a vehicle to communicate across barriers, right? There's so much to food that you are beautifully describing, way beyond food service and clinical dietetics, right? Or the more obvious things that we see out there, maybe food blogs or being a chef and things that are more obvious. But the way you're describing this connection between food and nutrition and culture and power and rights and, you know, all these incredible underlying concepts that we all need to be addressing in this country, right? In order to heal and move forward, you know, further into the 21st century, hopefully in a better way. What's your advice to young people on how to think through their own careers and to plan for their future?
Yeah, I began thinking about it, and this is partly why, and at some point I will write a book on it, and started that process of just begin gathering the knowledge from other women who have been food leaders. And what kind of grounds me is Joseph Campbell, who is a cultural mythologist, who wrote A Hero with a Thousand Faces. We sometimes just call it the hero's journey. But I really kind of set out and break down the concepts of the hero's journey and superimpose them on not only my life, but the life of now our avatar, little Wanda, and how in which we navigate. For those of Christian faith, we would say this is the walk of Jesus. And so many others who've gone on this journey of really searching for oneself through the process of also searching to be of service, and that they are intrinsically linked together. And so I would say, look at what you see that is a challenge around you. What is the skill set in which you can offer to be a problem solver? Because when you boil it down at the end of the day, that's what it is. How do you choose to be a problem solver that is, if you run the numbers of a cost benefit analysis, that it will have more benefit than cost. And at the same time, you will have a stronger ROI. I am influenced by MBA coursework, but it helps to understand that in nutrition, we do think through numbers, and the amount of investment of, the World Bank has said, and the UN, $1 a day in nutrition, you get a $16 return. That resonates with business people. That should resonate with anyone who's looking to be of service and of impact. And so I would say having a vision is clear, and that vision can come from looking at the vulnerability that surrounds you within yourself. And if you are finding the challenges within you, it becomes an important opportunity to be a powerful storyteller, because it comes from the heart. And the moment that I began shifting from speaking from my head and balancing with my heart, it became an important way in which I have been authentic in my communication, and one that I can never reflect and say, I don't know what I said, because if I know that I spoke from my heart, it will always be my truth, and it will be one that I can stand on with a firm foundation in place.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that incredible advice, wisdom. I think when hearing you speak is a wonderful way of trying to understand the depth that we can reach, right? The power that's behind action. Because you're a woman who has deep ideas and then acts, right? And you're so determined to make an impact. And it's very obvious with, all of the work that you do, and the way you present it out to the world, to people who need it. So thank you so much for your work. And thank you so much for speaking with me. I'm going to re-listen to this interview multiple times, I think, to pull out some of the really salient points that you've made, because there's so much there. And I want to make it really obvious to anybody who sees this interview and can read about it, and like a cheat sheet, here's a Tambra cheat sheet, because there's so much to what you say. So thank you for sharing the depth of your thought and process and career. And
you're quite welcome.
Appreciate your time. I
actually call them #Tambra's truth. If I were to be honest, when I do quote myself at times, but it really is always having a desire to find out what are the universal classical truths that we will find in anyone's lived experience if you were to do an archaeological dig on their life.
Okay. Yeah, great. You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for your time.
You're quite welcome. Take care.
Take care.